Well, it's great to be here, and I have to say, great to be speaking in this series of people, because I think one of the key things, perhaps, now we've had the two speakers, is to remind everyone quite how amazing what we've just heard is. This is an amazing democratization of access to customers, early lead customers, highly valuable, and access to finance. And we're going to hear from John later on about angel investing, another sort of innovation in access to finance, which is very complementary to sort of crowdfunding and all the rest of it. So this is pretty cool. And indeed, fantastic tools out here. This show is dedicated to the democratization of product development tools. But I guess my talk is saying, well, we're not done yet. There is a huge amount of knowledge that is not widely available yet. And actually, when you think about product development, and when you really understand what it is, not just to develop a product, but make a business, and we're hearing about fulfillment and sort of working with your customers when there's a problem or something like that. Oh, we're moving. Then the point is that we need to really look at the knowledge. So I think for me, I started industrial design training in 1988, right? And so I've seen a certain amount of it. So there's some new knowledge around and there's some old knowledge around. And the guys that were teaching me have been doing it in the 50s and 60s. So that for me is part of the question. How do we bring all of this knowledge together? So what I'm going to do is tell you very briefly about what we do at the CRL, because one of my answers to that question, how do we bring the knowledge together, is an accelerator. And secondly, I will answer sort of 5 questions that for me pull out maybe some of the insights, what we've learned about accelerating hardware startups, some of the unique challenges that they face. So firstly, something about the CRL. So we call ourselves London's home of hardware startups. We're the first purpose-built hardware accelerator. We're over in West London, actually near to Heathrow Airport. And we were founded 18 months ago. And maybe what's interesting about why we are near Heathrow Airport is it used to be a manufacturing epicenter. It was the heart of EMI Records vinyl factory, 17 acres. And not only we're in the His Master's Voice building, bottom left, the shipping building. So there were the Beatles and Stones records stacked up, ready to go around the world, having been pressed in another building in the plant. But just as importantly, the original central research laboratory was EMI's research labs. They commercialized stereo sound, multi-track recording, and then broadcast TV cameras, and then CAT scanners and airborne radar and things that were nothing to do with media. But they fundamentally understood what we all understand here, which is not just the medium you need the technology platform as well. So when we were set up, they said, what's the 21st century equivalent of a corporate R&D lab? It's a startup accelerator, clearly. So we have a 9-month acceleration program. And I'll sort of say a little bit more later, the range of things you have to learn, but it's everything around product development and manufacture and shipping and fulfillment and standards and market analysis and sizing and valuing your company, seeking finance. The list is almost endless, and it's certainly more than any single brain can cope with. And then if that all sounds a bit too intense, we also have a co-working space. So we've got 10,000 square feet in general, and people either come into the co-working space because they want to be on an accelerator at some point, but they're not ready yet, or maybe they've come off an accelerator or something like that. But it's a way to be part of this community where there's expert knowledge, both sort of from mentors, but also peers. And then there are 4 different workshops as well, from 3D printing to PCB manufacturing and all the rest of it. So that's enough, I think, for now about us as an organization. So here are 5 questions that I'd be asking if I was you. So I'm going to start with an obvious one first. And the first 2 questions actually about growing value. Do we understand the need yet? So I think we've already heard a little bit this sense sometimes that this space can be a little bit more focused on wants rather than needs. And indeed, some people comment that actually a lot of the consumer stuff that I think we're talking about in this session is not nearly as important as the industrial stuff. Well, I think many of us believe both are going to be important in terms of needs. But either way, really going out there to understand deep needs, headache pills rather than just vitamins, as a colleague of mine talks about it. This is incredibly important. But another of the questions is, when do you do that in the process? So, for instance, one of our startups, Sol, she makes smart packaging. It's responsive, active packaging. It uses biotechnology that checks the freshness of food. So she spent a long time with the little triangle, the bump mark. When it's bumpy, it's not fresh anymore. When it's smooth, it is fresh. But meanwhile, of course, she's asking the question, what do the retailers think? Where's that going to go in? Not just what the customers are thinking. Or the food producers. Is this good for eggs? Is this good for meat? Is this good for fish? You know, so there are so many questions when you're dealing with a technology like this. And the simple truth is that in terms of her business, she's probably got to decide a lot of these things before she launches, because it's the kind of product that really scales quickly. Whereas if you take Carlton, Carlton is launching a business called Accelerator, which is based on the reuse of rechargeable batteries, right? Rechargeable batteries are better than, alkaline batteries that you throw away, but nevertheless, we've got a massive lithium-ion waste stream going to be bigger and bigger with more electric vehicles. So what do you do with all the half-used batteries? So he's trying to work out what happens when you sort of test these things, certify these things, repackage these things with new control electronics. So what he does is things like he puts them on eBay, top left, and just tries to sell them. Is anyone interested to buy recycled batteries? Or then he begins to make kits and goes to trade shows and says, well, this is a backup power supply. What do you think about this? So he's always testing the market. And I bet he's the kind of guy who is actually going to launch and carry on learning. So one of the key things is, again, I think the modern way is to decide, do you understand the deep need enough to launch? Because you're definitely going to find out more. So some people try to get it right before they launch, 80% and just 20% after they launch. And some people, it's like why software went into beta. Some people say, no, I'm just going to understand 40% of what I need to learn. I bet you I can launch in some form and then learn the other 60%. So kind of when and how you learn about the deep need is increasingly shifting as we get more access to markets. Second question. What business am I in? So one of the things I may or may not have said in the startup is we're not just interested in products, we're interested in businesses. So sometimes when we're talking about sort of fulfillment crowdfunding, people are just looking at a product. They're perfectly excited by the product that you're offering. But you're going to hear from John later on, and he's thinking about sort of, angel investment stages and later on. That's really more about something that will scale. It may be a single product, we'll hear from him, but it may also be a business. So then the question is, what's your second business? You heard about the bleep bleeps already. What was interesting about them? They launched by showing off their theoretical product range. They said, we will help parents with many different aspects of parenthood. Not everyone does that. A similar example, I'm delighted to say Helen Sphere is featured in this month's DEVELOP3D magazine. You'll see it in your bags. She came to us with a very similar sort of stage to the bleep bleep. She said, you know what? Education. Education for STEM subjects, teachers are not able to make it really engaging. Let's say I'm teaching physics and I need to understand waveforms. I want to make a kit for you that will help you build an electric guitar, and that's how you're going to understand waveforms. So in other words, Helen understands what business she's in. She's making the lives of teachers teaching the curriculum better in secondary schools. And she has multiple product ideas that she'll feed into that single market. So she really understands, single market, multiple products. Conversely, we could argue that this is Ping, this is Christian. As he puts it, this is guidance for your shared home. So imagine you're renting your house out through Airbnb. You want a really professional way to communicate with your tenants. Actually, here's a beacon technology. That little puck is a beacon. You put your phone up to it, and a video plays or some kind of text telling you to feed the cat or how to lock up or how to use the cooker. The point being that it may well be that he launches with this sort of business-to-consumer market with Airbnb, but ultimately he may switch to small hotels, B&Bs, even large hotel chains. So in other words, his business growth strategy is to take a single product and now sell it in multiple markets. So again, it doesn't matter which of those classic it's called bowling pin strategy you take. You've just got to have that sense of how is my business going to grow? And therefore, when you do have investors, more equity-based investors, either crowd or angel, then they know how they're going to get paid back. So again, we help people with this. Third question. So if those first two questions were about growing the value, the second two questions are about reducing the risk. Is this minimal enough? I think for me, what's interesting is we've become so used to multinationals with multi-million or billion-dollar budgets making amazing stuff. Sometimes our founders forget that they are mere mortal startups bootstrapping themselves. So they want to promise the world. Now, it may well be that they can promise the world in a few years' time, but the real question is, what can you launch with now? And of course, we saw a step change let's say between 1997 and 2007 in the software world. For various reasons, people began to think about apps, not applications. Even when you were thinking applications, you know, Photoshop was launched in 1990 and it was invented in 1988. But, you know, it took many years. Photoshop 1.0 didn't do very much, frankly, right? So I think one of the big questions is, we've forgotten sometimes in startup hardware about the minimal viable product. What is that minimal thing, the heart of the value that meets the need that I should launch with? So I'm always really impressed by people who say, I'm going to go simpler. This is Koski. It's a mixed reality board game. Imagine assembling those blocks and then viewing it through the iPad, and the iPad will have virtual elements on top of it, and you can begin to play games with the little people on board. And they put out a video. It went viral, featured in many, many places, and it was seen as a great success. Many people were interested. And as you see on the top, it says, coming soon on Kickstarter. That's the only bit that isn't true, actually, because then they worked out, no, they couldn't actually build it as it was. It would now fail the prototype test, right? And so therefore they came to us and said, we've got some ideas about Koski Mini. This is how we're going to launch this amazing idea, but we're going to launch it as simply as possible. That takes guts, because as Heather said, bigger is not necessarily better. And in this case, just launching with what you can to get traction in the market, and again, to learn what you're really in the business of, what needs are you meeting, is really important. Slightly different example of this is Kida Music. So Kida Music is, their mission, the business, is to bring Indian music into schools, especially around the tablet drum. So Kuljit Bamra is a world-renowned tabla player, and he's the lead entrepreneur here. And what he said is, there are two problems with the tabla drum in this vanguard of Indian music education. The one is that there is no music notation system. It's a guru-disciple relationship, and it's kind of verbal. You sort of sound out the notes. And the second is that tabla drums are very, very fragile, and so they get wrecked in a school. So they're working on both things, an electronic tabla drum and a music notation system. But guess what? You know, the drum's taking a while. The trigger accuracy and the trigger response time you need to get those very, very subtle finger taps is hard. They've cracked it, but quite wisely, they're launching with the music. It's really easy. They can launch with the music, understand how people use the music with an existing tabla drum, and then bring in the hardware later on. So again, it's a great way to start the traction. They know what they're in the business of, they know what kind of system they're producing, so just launch with the bits of the system that already have value, but don't sort of take all the R&D dollars. So fourth, so this is the second one of de-risking. Am I making promises I can keep? Now this again, is very much, it doesn't matter whether you're talking to people like John, who've invested in you, and frankly, they will only invest in you if they've seen that you have made progress according to stated milestones, and you are keeping promises to yourself even, or via platforms such as Kickstarter, making promises to the crowd. And I've seen people who I've backed who for 2 years have been trying to make the promises, keep the promises they made. 2 years of hassle from thousands of people. And in the end, they have to admit defeat. I wouldn't like to go on that psychological journey, I can tell you. So, this is the point where essentially not knowing is not good enough. Hope is not a strategy, as came up during Obama's campaign, the detractors. So even though I am a little saddened in some ways that it's taken 18 months since the start of the CRL for our first product to hit crowdfunding, I am nevertheless proud that I'm convinced that the people who've hit crowdfunding first will deliver. Because this is not a simple product, but we know, we've taken them out to China, we know the in-depth conversations, they know how much it's going to cost to make, they know how long it's going to take to prototype it, they know they can keep this promise. And you can see from the inside, I'll play you a video in a second to show you what it is, you can see how many parts there are. That's the level of complexity. So could they have made it simpler? I would like to know maybe whether they could, but nevertheless, they've worked as hard as they can to keep this promise. So I'll play you half a video to explain it.
Say hello to Giotto, the connected display that draws with a pen. Just use the app to tell Giotto what to draw. Then sit back and watch as the pen works its magic, turning your pixels into pen and ink. The uses for Giotto are limitless, and because Giotto is connected, you can send a message to your friend's wall from anywhere in the world. Imagine some of the world's best artists and illustrators delivering art straight to your wall. Or simply display information in style. And when you're ready for something new, Giotto wipes the slate clean. From sending the most important message of the day to keeping you in the loop. Exhibiting a priceless masterpiece to displaying the things that matter. It seems some things in life are just better off screen.
The second half of the video goes more into the backstory, so have a look on Kickstarter, of course, Giotto. But I think what's interesting there is that they really understand what they're doing. But it's taken a long time for them to get there, to build a good campaign, and to understand all the design for manufacture. And that's someone said to me the other day when they had had a few pledges not fulfilled. No one ever does this out of malice. We are all optimistic people, I'm sure, here. We are all trying to define what it is that is the Internet of Things. So none of this is ever malicious. It's just through a lack of knowledge. So the first step, therefore, really, and my final question, is to always admit you probably don't know everything. And that's the one thing that we almost struggle with, I will be honest with you, at the start of our accelerator. How do we get everyone into that mindset where we say to them, it is okay to admit not to know? Because you have so much to learn. Being open to learning is the key attitude that you need. Because they've been so, it's very hard sometimes, I think, to move between sort of selling and listening. You constantly want to sell your pitch, sell your idea, which sounds like you know, but on the other hand, you don't really know. So you need to admit that you need to listen. And that's a very, very hard balance to take. So we're trying to do all we can to find ways to do that. So on the one hand, we give people massive lists. These are the kind of the 4 work streams, and with each of those sections, there's a list as long as your arm of the things you need to learn. So as soon as you see a kind of a 1,000-point checklist, and you can only tick off 20 of them, you know something of where you're going to go. But I think, secondly, we try to do things viscerally. We were in Shenzhen a couple of weeks ago. This is Shenzhen Valley Ventures, and this is a whole area dedicated to testing. Each of these machines, sets fire to it, bombards it with salt water, drops it on the floor, whatever it is. And so what's interesting is that everyone knows that many people know that testing has to happen, roughly. But it's not until you think of your baby, your beautiful thing, being destroyed in this way that it kind of rams it home, actually. It does have to go through this sort of process. You'd better prepare. Or we just try and bring people in the whole time. So there's some new guys I met last week, round the corner from us, near Heathrow. They do logistics. A 5-minute conversation with this guy reminded me how little I know about logistics and how frightening it is, because you could have, £10,000 worth of stock over the wrong side of the world and the wrong side of a sort of a trade barrier or something like that. So again, unfortunately, ignorance is not bliss in this case, and it is absolutely all about planning everything out, because how else are you going to know how to price your product, whether through retail or through Kickstarter? So ultimately, that's my list. I think for me, when I ever ask those questions or ask those questions of the startups, it just sharpens the mind and helps them really to understand how to really focus their idea and get it to market. If you're interested in more, just come and have a chat or look at the website. We'll be taking people into the Accelerator, advertising that sort of mid-summer, co-working anytime. And if anyone's in London next Thursday, 2 days' time, this Thursday, we've got a funding event, again, sort of equity crowdfunding, banks, angel investors, lots of people around to answer all your funding questions. Thanks very much.